Before any of the recorded, streamed sessions in Critical Role's wildly popular D&D campaigns, the cast plays what they call Session Zero games. Short, off-camera, pre-campaign adventures that we don't get to see.
The Wuyun Gates, where you two first began this journey in Session Zero.
We played for an hour and a half with each of the characters before we started broadcasting.
We played our Session Zero, and I was just gonna do like a straightforward voice, and it was terrible.
The new animated Mighty Nein show is obviously a polished, fictionalized version of the real D&D game. More clear-cut character motivation, less table talk, and thankfully an unchanged quantity of jokes. But the early episodes are still giving us our first real look at a part of the campaign we've never seen before. And hidden in those episodes is a technique you can use to make your D&D games better. It's especially powerful before a campaign starts, but I think there's also a way to use it in an ongoing game. I'm between campaigns right now as a dungeon master in that brief, transcendent moment when hope is still alive and none of my PCs are wanted for arson yet. Campaigns can last years, so anytime I'm starting fresh, I try to look for early campaign strategies that might make the whole experience better. If there's something I can put into place now that improves the next few years of gameplay, I want to know about it. So when I watched those first few Mighty Nein episodes, it inspired me to take a deep dive into the concept of Session Zero adventures. But I'm getting ahead of myself because when most of us think of Session Zero, it's nothing like what the Critical Role cast describes. For most people, Session Zero is a practical, above-table meeting. That's not to say it can't be creative or fun. I think talking about the kind of game we want to play together is often both of those things. But its main purpose isn't to be fun, it's to set expectations, identify boundaries, decide what characters you're gonna play, and settle questions like, should we be chipping in for pizza? The answer to that last one is yes. It's always yes. Even though every table approaches Session Zero in their own way, what Critical Role is doing feels like a completely different animal to me. And for good reason. I mean, their animal has merch in Hot Topic and a feature in Variety. The cast of Critical Role isn't just preparing to play D&D, they're preparing to perform D&D. While the rest of us can find our way to character voices and party chemistry at the table over time, they don't have that luxury. They are on camera and millions of people are watching. If they don't hit the ground running, the YouTube comments will let them know, with enthusiasm. By playing even just a single session before anybody hits the big red live stream button, the cast gets a chance to test drive their characters. No matter how much prep you do, translating a character from idea in your head to actual person speaking out loud is always a little jarring. Sometimes you open your mouth and realize instantly that this is not the voice you want to be doing for the next 3 years. Travis deciding after Session Zero that Ford's original voice was terrible? He's just like me for real. Now, we don't know much about what those early sessions looked like because they were never recorded, and the cast has only spoken about them in little pieces scattered across dozens of different interviews and panels. I did my best, guys, but even the magic of hyperfocus doesn't allow me to watch over 200 Q&As for one video. But even though the Mighty Nein animated show is fictionalized and isn't a one-to-one representation of the actual gameplay, we do know that those early episodes used the Session Zero games as a starting point. In an interview with Polygon, Travis talked about their decision to move a little more slowly with the Mighty Nein story than they did with Vox Machina. He said, "We're throwing caution to the wind and taking our time more with these seasons, hence the starting from a Session Zero perspective." So I think it's fair to look at those early episodes of Mighty Nein before they come together at the carnival as a loose representation of Campaign 2's Session Zero games. Plus, I have some useful intel of my own. Over the last few years, I've gotten to play in some pretty high-profile live-streamed and recorded games. It's crazy, they really will let you in anywhere if you're wearing a high-vis vest. Turns out this off-camera warm-up technique is actually pretty common. When I played a one-shot for LEGO under Anjali Bhamani, she ran a brief little segment of gameplay during our Session Zero, where we interacted with an NPC in a tavern and got to know each other a little. And before the recent Forgotten Realms live play that I did for the official D&D channel, Abriya Iyengar had us do a quick little stealth mission so we could get our feet under us. And yes, it absolutely helped me as a performer. It gave me a glimpse into how the others at the table were planning to play so I could better match their energy, especially since I'd never played with any of them before. It showed me some holes in my characterization that I could patch before we were on camera, and it just generally helped me get some of the jitters out. Not all the jitters, of course. I have anxiety. There is a permanent minimum jitter at all times. But even though it was helpful for the performance aspect of a streamed game, that's not all it accomplished. I noticed several ways that prequel-style game had a positive effect on the play that came afterwards. Positive enough that I think it's absolutely worth borrowing for home games. More on that right after today's sponsor. You know, I've always been jealous of D&D elves. They get dramatic backstories, bladed weapons, height. Winterfest elves get 12-hour shifts painting nutcrackers. But not this year. Thanks to One Shot Wonders Holiday Adventure Pack, I finally get to be the elf I was meant to be. It's everything I love. Winter festivities and sanctioned violence. 5 holiday adventures for levels 1 through 12, complete with battle maps and original monsters. Sleigh chases, pudding gremlins, toy factory break-ins. Honestly, it's all I asked for this Winterfest. Each one is playable in 3 hours, so it's perfect for a cozy one-shot or a themed session in a longer campaign. For me, it means I can probably finish all 5 before my next shift starts at dawn. Not bad. But I'm glad the adventures include 12 magic items based on the 12 days of Christmas. If I get a hold of those turtle dove daggers, it's over. Now all I need is an adventuring party. Maybe I can find one of those new playable species, like the living snowman or the Arctic fox. What, you want in? Hey, the hollier the jollier. Pick up One Shot Wonders Holiday Adventure Pack on D&D Beyond. Hey, Joy, want to help us ice the gingerbread? Carol, I told you, I am clocked out. Suit yourself. So let's talk about why this technique actually works and why it creates such a noticeable improvement at the table, even if your game isn't being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of people. I'm not going to call it Session Zero because I don't really think that's what this is. And I think having a more conventional Session Zero, where you talk out of character about your expectations for the game, is still very important. I personally would not suggest that this prequel session replace that. Instead, I'm thinking of what Critical Role does more like Session 0.5. I thought I made that up, but apparently people talk about it on Reddit. Terminally online minds think alike, I guess. It's after Session 0, but before Session 1. You don't have to split up the party for Session 0.5, but personally I recommend it. I think playing this session in smaller groups has its own perks. Groups of 2 or 3 players give your character room to breathe in a way a bigger table simply doesn't. If you've ever played with a party of under 4 players, you'll know what I mean here. You just get to do so much more. You have space to talk and experiment, and NPCs might even be able to finish a complete sentence before someone jumps in to yell insight check. For those who are easily steamrolled by the party's resident extrovert, a small group turns the volume down and makes it easier for quieter players to step in. That's actually why I always carry a sword. To split the party. But whether you're playing with the whole crew or you're splitting the party, the difference between a Session 0.5 and a Session 1 is that it's actual gameplay, but it's not strictly canon. It's like Schrodinger's session. If you want to change your character's voice or personality or first name afterwards, you don't have to worry about retconning anything. You can pick and choose which of the events of this game actually happened in the world of your campaign and which were just a failed experiment. This session is fluid and flexible. If you have new players in your game, this can be especially valuable. These sessions lower the pressure on players. For a lot of people, new to tabletop or not, playing a character for the first time can be intimidating. You're figuring out your personality, your approach to the story, what kinds of skills and features your character has, and you're doing it while everyone is watching you and waiting for their turn. A test session, especially in a smaller group, gives people a chance to warm up, both socially and mechanically, without the full weight of the group dynamic pressing in. Going into Campaign 2, Travis had only played spellcasters in one-shots. The bulk of his D&D experience was just Grog, a classic barbarian who hits first and, if the hitting goes well, never has to ask questions. As we all know, I am a slut for warlocks, but they can be a challenging class to play even amongst spellcasters. If I were Travis, I too would rather my first Eldritch Blast be cast in a private setting. Another big benefit is that it helps players start to form early relationships between their characters. I've talked before about how much I love going into a game with characters having pre-established relationships, but whether they're siblings or just strangers who made significant eye contact while witnessing a messy public breakup, having any kind of connection that came from actual gameplay instead of just backstory can have a shockingly big impact on how easy and natural roleplay feels. Caleb and Nott are both characters that could have been tough to roleplay off of. Caleb is quiet and traumatized, hesitant to trust, and haunted by his past, not exactly the life of the party. Meanwhile, Nott is secretive, defensive, and even downright hostile when she hasn't had a drink. But by connecting these characters to each other, we get to see them both engaged and active in party roleplay from the very first session. Without that pre-campaign small group gameplay that cemented the vibes between Nott and Caleb, we might have waited weeks to get past their respective lone wolf stages. Even if they had come to the table planning on a relationship, they would have been feeling out their dynamic for the first time while sharing space with the full 7-person party. When you go into Session 1 already having some kind of rapport with at least one other character, it changes the entire social math of the table. You're not trying to roleplay your first interaction with a half-dozen strangers at the same time. You've already solved one piece of the puzzle, and that makes solving the rest easier. It's like emotional sourdough starter. It's weird and alive, and you're not entirely sure how it works, but if you feed it and take care of it, you get bread. What were we talking about? Anyway, perhaps the biggest and most quantifiable advantage is that it lets people test drive their characters before the game officially begins. No matter how much time you spend building your character, there is always a moment when you sit down to actually play them and realize, oh, this is not what I thought I ordered. Sometimes you realize your spell list is all wrong, or you missed an essential skill proficiency. Sometimes you thought you were making a weird little guy, but in practice, you're just a guy. A warm-up session gives you space to notice these problems early. You can change your voice, redo your spell loadout, adjust your stats, or even tweak your backstory before the before version gets locked in. It's like a soft launch for your character. You get to debug the system before the real campaign ships. Now, you might be saying, Ginny, why does it matter what you call it? A lot of DMs will let you make those changes during the first few sessions anyway. Why invent this session 0.5 thing when you can just be more flexible? And I think this is a totally valid point. A lot of us are already getting these benefits just by quietly pretending sessions 1 through 3 are part of the character creation process. But I also think there's something to be said for being intentional about what we're trying to do. Codifying session 0.5 so that we all know what it's for and what we're trying to accomplish can make it more effective. If players know they're supposed to be test driving and that the stakes are low, they'll be more comfortable experimenting and taking big swings. A less confident player might not ask to change their character build if they don't know that's allowed. And as a game master, knowing that this session is meant to be a dress rehearsal allows you to make thoughtful choices about what kinds of encounters your players face. Which brings us to the next major consideration. How do you actually run one of these sessions? Because they shouldn't be the same as a standard game session. I've boiled it down to 3 things to keep in mind. First, try to touch on all the major pillars of play. For D&D, that's social interaction, exploration, and combat. You should have at least one moment where each kind of character can stretch their legs. Let the barbarian do some violence, let the rogue do some sneaking, and let the druid hold a conversation with a hedge. If you're building this session to help players figure out who their characters are in practice, everyone needs a chance to try their thing. This doesn't need to be some expertly crafted, complete adventure or anything. It doesn't even really need a self-contained story arc or a satisfying conclusion like a one-shot would. This is dress rehearsal, so if you have to choose, I would suggest prioritizing broad experiences over, to put it bluntly, fun and coherent gameplay. The next goal to keep in mind is pointing characters towards the same destination. Session 0.5 has the chance to be the bridge between this is my backstory and this is why I'm actually here with these people. It offers in-world opportunities to connect the dots between their personal story and the shared story of the campaign. In the Mighty Nein, Jester is a great example of how this works. Her backstory has her growing up secluded in the chateau, which doesn't exactly set her up to join an adventuring party. So in her session 0, she's leaving home for the first time and traveling north towards the Dash. That puts her on the same road as Ford, who's headed the same direction for totally different reasons. They're not being forced together, but the geography is doing a little matchmaking. Their backstories haven't changed, they just happen to point toward the same place. And that's the GM's real job here, not stitching everyone's backstories together, but designing a session where the characters' goals can naturally align. It sounds complicated, but it can actually be incredibly simple. If you're playing an NPC like Jester's mother, Marion, and she sends Jester to meet a helpful contact, you get to decide where that contact actually is, and you can place them somewhere that moves your characters onto intersecting paths. When handled right, Session 0.5 makes the party's formation in Session 1 feel organic instead of arbitrary, because instead of just telling them that they're all in the same place, you've already set them up on their individual paths, and now they'll meet on their own. It's an antidote to that tired, a half dozen strangers meet in a tavern trope. And yes, I do recognize how ironic that is to say when the Campaign 2 characters did in fact meet in a tavern. In the end, the players are the ones who get to draw the line between who they were on paper and who they're going to be together at the table. You're just giving them a reason to end up in the same place at the same time. Or at least a reason that isn't, this tavern got rave reviews in Soup and Ale Monthly. The last thing on your to-do list is to make sure everyone understands the canon level of this prequel. I mentioned earlier that Session 0.5 should be flexible by design, but how flexible is really up to your individual table. Just make sure your players know exactly how much of this session counts, so they know what they're signing up for. If someone dies here, do they still get to play their character? Is it okay to rearrange your ability scores after this session, change your spell list, pick a new subclass? Some tables might decide the events of this session are fully canon. Others might treat it more like a draft. Laura once said that Jester went unconscious in Session 0 and that if Ford hadn't used a potion on her, she might not have been playing Jester in the campaign. Was that literally true? Probably not. I imagine they'd already commissioned art at that point, and there is no stronger armor than commission prices. But it's very important that your players know going into this whether or not they should fear the Reaper. There's just one problem left. Most people aren't starting a new campaign next week. So how is any of this helpful if you're already knee-deep in a game? It's true that you'll get the most mileage out of this technique at the start of a campaign, but if you strip this concept down to its essentials, a flexible, low-pressure, small group session with a different goal than your main game, I think it can become a much more broadly applicable tool, and a good reminder that D&D doesn't have to be rigid. One of the things I love about tabletop gaming is how it brings me together with my friends consistently, on a schedule, despite our busy lives. But this perk can easily morph into a limitation if we let the structure and machinery of scheduled fun get in the way of play. This kind of small group, flexible side session, tied to the main narrative but not chained to it, is a great way to loosen that grip. It reminds you that the game can bend a little. You're allowed to experiment without the whole campaign collapsing like a Jenga tower. You're thinking of Dread. We use dice around here. Next time you split the party, you could actually split the party. Half the group comes by on Saturday, the other half on Sunday, and each side plays out their part of the mission separately. Or if that sounds like logistical hell, you could break your usual 4-hour session into 2 back-to-back 2-hour ones, so the time commitment stays the same. I'm not trying to sign you up for extra work, I promise. Put down the sword. Imagine a high-stakes stealth mission where the two groups genuinely can't communicate. How cool would it be to actually feel that separation? To have one half of the table sitting there on session day wondering if the other half is going to be at the rendezvous point, or if something went wrong. That kind of suspense is hard to fake when everyone is physically sitting together eating garlic knots. Next time scheduling isn't working out, let the players who can make it have their own small adventure. Or if two characters want to explore their relationship without the rest of the party hovering like nosy aunts, give them their own session. In one of my home games, my husband Josh's character stepped away for a few months to deal with a backstory situation. When it was time to bring him back, we ran a one-off where Josh played his missing character and the rest of us played the cultists he was traveling with. We got to do a siege, cause absolute mayhem, and take zero responsibility, and we also got to help stitch his character's story back into ours. It felt fresh and exciting and extremely fun. And not just because I invented maybe my favorite character ever, Tick the Goblin Cleric, who is filthy for religious reasons. If these ideas sound unhinged to you, that's fine. Every table is different, and what sounds fun to me might sound like a logistical nightmare to you. All I'm saying is that sessions like this can keep the schedule and structure of the game from strangling the fun out of it. Sometimes you just need to break the format so you can remember that you're playing a game, not attending a weekly meeting with dice. Listen, there are a lot of things that live play groups do that don't make sense for home games. Those two types of games have different goals and call for different types of play. But in this case, I actually do think session 0.5 is worth stealing. Not so you can rehearse your character voice or have a mild panic attack when you realize your co-stars have really cool and interesting ways to describe their magic. Alex Ward, but because it makes space for players to settle into their characters and start building their relationships, so they can be certain about what they're signing up to play for the next few years. By the way, if you're enjoying the Mighty Nein, you might enjoy some of the absolute ton of Jester fan content I have made. I can't help it, she's perfect. I cosplayed Jester for years, including with Laura Bailey herself, and I even got to contribute in my own small way to the show because the actor who voiced the Ruby of the Sea was sent my Jester accent tutorial as a resource.
I think we even sent a clip of Ginny D.
Yeah, I have loads of different clips to listen to.
Of Ginny D?
Oh, Ginny D.
Yeah, because she does a whole
thank
YouTube
you.
video about how to do the accent. So we sent that clip as well.
So that's crazy.